The Mandalorian. This show is a mess. How did this come out so much worse than Andor? Before I get into the review, and almost nothing happens in this episode. It's pretty much a long fight sequence, nonsense and filler. It's like a Michael Bay film again.
Mr. Bay, can you think of any ideas?
An 18-wheeler spins out of control, and it's all like, "Brush!" in this huge tanker full of diamonds. Crawl! Crawl!
Those aren't ideas, those are special effects.
I don't understand the difference.
I know you don't. Get him out of here!
Before that, I wanted to do some housekeeping about things from previous episodes. In my Gotham Knights reviews and She-Hulk and the Rings of Power, I noted that Hollywood writers seem to be struggling in discerning between a hero and a villain, in discerning between what is moral and what is immoral, and this seems very pronounced at Disney, the CW and Amazon, who were kind enough to give us Genocide Galadriel. And on that note, I need to talk about the Mandalorian TV show, and specifically Bo-Katan, because in this season of Mando, we have seen Bo-Katan Kryze get pushed more to the forefront in The Mandalorian, as The Mandalorian gets pushed more into the background, and it's starting to look increasingly like another bait and switch. Din Djarin was the bait, Bo-Katan is the switch. Now, I didn't watch the Clone Wars TV show at the time, but I decided to start, because I just became aware of what Bo-Katan supposedly got up to in that series, and her membership in a group called the Death Watch, that carried out terror attacks on civilian targets, including a bombing at a war memorial aimed at bumping off her own sister. Her sister was the ruler of the Mandalorians. Bo-Katan's group also worked with Darth Maul and Count Dooku in order to get power on their planet. Bo's sister, s3e7 Kryze, was a pacifist and was attempting reform of Mandalore to make it more peaceful and save her people, because the constant fighting of the Mandalorian clans with ever larger and more powerful weapons was destroying their entire planet. And looking at the images of Mandalore in the Clone Wars TV series, Mandalore was pretty horrible even before the Empire bombed it. Warfare and heavy industry had reduced their planet to a desert, and that is what Bo and her organisation violently rebelled against. Their desire to keep Mandalore's bloodthirsty warrior creed because they're fundamentalist religious zealots. They rebelled against s3e7, trying to stop them killing each other and make their planet livable. Bo-Katan was a lieutenant in this organisation called the Death Watch, leading a group called the Night Owls within the Death Watch, and she's still wearing the same armour in the Mandalorian TV series as she did in the Death Watch. She didn't even repaint it. And that's not to say that a person cannot seek redemption for past misdeeds, and I would describe some of what she did as clearly bad acts, but they actually have to seek redemption and change. How has Bo-Katan changed since she did those things? The Mandalorian himself is a member of a group called the Tribe, or the Children of the Watch, and the Watch in that is the Death Watch again. He's an inductee into the same group, the most hardline of the violent hardliners. You remember this big guy with the laser gatling? He's called Paz Vizsla. He's of the same family as Pre Vizsla, the old leader of the Death Watch. The Darksaber, the weapon that we're told is a sign of leadership among the Mandalorian people, the Clone Wars series tells us that's just something their ancestors stole from a Jedi temple. And this is who Disney and their writers saw fit to make the heroes of their TV show called The Mandalorian. Violent extremists, and on YouTube I can't even use the accurate word for what this group are without YouTube squashing the video. It's become pretty clear to me at this point that Disney simply cannot be trusted to be around children or teach them good moral lessons any longer. Who thought any of this was a good idea? Who greenlit this? Do you know what else I learned watching the Clone Wars? How juvenile Disney have become. The Mandalorian is rated TV-14. The Clone Wars was rated age 8, and yet it is far less juvenile than The Mandalorian. So in an effort to find out if Bo-Katan really was a member of a terror group, I went and watched some of Disney Lucasfilm's The Clone Wars series, and what the hell is wrong with the Clone Wars series? I watched some episodes and quite quickly found myself getting lost, because at no point does the show bother to tell the audience when anything happens, and they also took the bold and insane creative decision to not have the show in chronological order. Who thought that was a good idea? If you want to watch the story in chronological order, you supposedly have to start with Season 2, Episode 16, followed by Season 1, Episode 16, then the theatrical release film, then Season 3, Episode 1, then Season 3, Episode 3, and then it's back to Season 1, Episode 1 again, and it's all a complete mess. There are multi-part stories that are in completely different seasons to each other. But if you power through that extremely odd creative decision, there's some very good stuff in there. The Clone Wars still has the prequel problem, and there are lots of fights between characters who can't die in the Clone Wars TV series because they're needed for the future films. So there's never any tension in an Anakin Skywalker fight scene in the Clone Wars. He can never be in any real peril. Nothing can happen to little orphan Annie because he has a big role to play in the subsequent 4 films. I found myself getting annoyed at the constant references in the Clone Wars. How many times can I hear someone say, "I've got a bad feeling about this," and still, as the show went on, I found myself increasingly enjoying it, and far more than I've enjoyed The Mandalorian lately, and a lot of that has to do with Anakin Skywalker of all people. The Clone Wars TV series takes the time to show Anakin's slow descent into darkness in a way that was largely absent in the Star Wars prequel trilogy films, and it's a lot more believable for me too than the prequels were, where it always felt quite abrupt. Anakin's closeness to Mace Windu in the Clone Wars also just makes the coming events more tragic. The fight sequences in the Clone Wars are quite crisp. The Clone Wars had Genndy Tartakovsky working on it, so the fights reminded me quite a lot of his previous work on projects like Samurai Jack. So yes, the Clone Wars has a lot to offer, and I've only watched up to Season 3 so far, and I understand it gets better if anything. Anyway, back to the crappy Mandalorian. What a waste of time this series has turned out to be. I would have quite liked to have seen Din Djarin working as a bounty hunter for 3 seasons. Throw in some better bad guys, maybe let Pedro Pascal act and take the helmet off, throw in a love interest or two, maybe a femme fatale, and in the Star Wars universe that could have been a winner. Instead, this episode confirmed my worst fears. It served up things I wasn't interested in, and predicted episodes ago. Like I predicted that the Mandalorians would try to resettle Mandalore and get squashed by a giant monster, all the way back in my review of episode 3 some 4 weeks ago. Mandos will probably all want to come back now for the opportunity to start on a newly reborn Mandalore and build a new civilization right on top of that massive death lizard. It'll be great. It can come out of the water and squash them. I said that as a worst case scenario. I said that as a joke, and then they actually did it. And last episode, I predicted this. Still no decent bad guy, we're fast running out of time and only 2 episodes left this season, and we're probably going to get a reheated, tepid boss battle with Moff Gideon again in the finale. I hoped that they wouldn't do it, and then that is exactly what they did in this episode. So how did we get there? The episode starts off and the Imperial agent Elia Kane still hasn't been caught despite being extremely obviously still working for the Empire. She's walking the streets of Coruscant at night and... Ooh, I like that music. The city looks grimy and smoky. And with the rain, it's all very cyberpunk, so it started off well, and then they immediately ruined it, as she has a meeting with an Imperial probe droid, just standing in an alley, and how did nobody notice that? For reference, Coruscant is about the size of Earth. With cameras, droids and surveillance everywhere, Earth has a population of near 8 billion. In canon, Coruscant has a population of 2 trillion. so the population density on Coruscant is about 250 times that of Earth. How are you just going to go and have a secret meeting in an alley with an Imperial probe droid? How would nobody notice that droid coming through the atmosphere? How would nobody see the meeting? It's not like she's being quiet. Ellie uses the probe droid to talk to Moff Gideon and tells him that the pirates hit trouble on Navarro. It turns out that the remnants of the Empire are trying to regain power through piracy and weaken the Republic. A load of Imperials then have a meeting and discuss the return of Grand Admiral Thrawn. Meanwhile, the Mandos all meet up and Bo-Katan returns with her fleet to Navarro. The two groups of competing religious zealots do not get along well. They fight a lot, and meanwhile Grogu gets a mech suit made out of the remains of the IG unit that tried to squash him earlier this season. The Mandos then decide to leave Navarro, because it's clearly too safe for them to live on. Nobody's been eaten by a giant monster in at least 10 minutes, so they depart to resettle Mandalore. The Mandos take their fleet to Mandalore, including the kids, meet some Mandalorians who've been living on the planet for the entire time since it was supposedly uninhabitable, making that line look even stupider in retrospect. The Mandos decide to go to the Great Forge of Mandalore, and luckily the Mandos they just happen to run into know the way and take them there on a strange barge-like vehicle. On the way, the Mandos argue and bicker over a game, and Big Gatling Laser Guy ends up in a fight to the death with Bo-Katan's captain, where they try to knife each other, and Grogu is the only adult in the room and breaks it up. The barge gets attacked by a giant monster just to make the Mandalorians feel at home. The monster crushes the barge and the Mandos flee, but by pure coincidence, they just so happen to be at the forge already. They go underground, and on the whole planet, they just happen to stumble onto Moff Gideon's secret Empire base. The Mandos then get attacked by some new Dark Troopers, who are a lot physically weaker than the old ones for some reason, and the Mandalorians easily overpower them up close. But they can fly now, and are covered in Beskar armour, and the whole fight feels empty and pointless, as the new Dark Troopers had no build-up whatsoever. They turn up, lose, and then run away. The Mandos foolishly chase them into a trap as they get drawn further into the base, and get separated by blast doors and trapped in. But they were never trapped, because Bo-Katan has the Darksaber and could cut her way out at any point she wants. But luckily for Moff Gideon, she forgets she had it until the Mando had been captured by Gideon, and the Mandos all run away, leaving Gatling Guy to cover their escape and fight the troopers alone. And Big Gatling Guy wins, which just makes the rest running away look even worse. They leave him to die for no reason, as he's later killed by Praetorian guards that Gideon got off one of the other Imperials earlier this episode. Another episode of pretty much zero character development. I'm going to go watch some Clone Wars instead, because this was trash. Characters' actions repeatedly made no sense whatsoever, or were entirely contradictory with their preceding character, just to make contrived plot points happen. What a grotesque waste of time and money.
Those look good. A big salty clam would sure go great with this heat.